The Florida sun beat down on my thinning hair as I wrestled the overflowing trash bag from the kitchen can. Another week gone, another collection of memories, mostly mundane, stuffed into a dark green plastic sack destined for the curb. I'd lived in this little house, nestled in this seemingly quiet suburban neighborhood of Palm Coast, for over 30 years. Raised my kids here after their mother had passed. Watched them grow, move out, start families of their own. Now, it was just me and the echoes of a life well lived. The house felt emptier these days, but the routine, the simple acts of living, kept me grounded. Taking out the trash was one of those routines. A small, insignificant task, perhaps, but it was mine. The humidity hung heavy in the air, clinging to my skin like a damp cloth. I maneuvered the bulging bag towards the front door, my old knees protesting with each step. Outside, the afternoon was drowsy, the cicadas buzzing their lazy summer song. Usually, this was my favorite part of the day. A chance to breathe in the fresh air, check on my roses, maybe wave to a neighbor. Lately though, my peace had been disturbed. By a woman named Karen Porter. Karen, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, her designer sunglasses perched atop her nose, and her ever-present scowl, was a relatively new addition to the neighborhood. Moved in about a year ago, renting the house across the street. From day one, she seemed to have a problem with me. Maybe it was my old house, not as spick and span as the other newer houses on the block. Maybe it was my unkempt lawn, which I tried my best to maintain, but my old bones didn't always cooperate. Or maybe, and I suspected this was closer to the truth, it was the color of my skin. I was the only black man on this street. Everyone else was white. Her complaints started small. My trash cans were too close to the property line. My music was too loud, I barely listen to music these days. My car, a reliable but admittedly aging Buick, was an eyesore. I tried to be polite, to appease her, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. Her gaze always held a judgmental edge, a subtle disdain that pricked at my dignity. I tried to ignore it, to chalk it up to her being unhappy with her own life, but it was getting harder and harder. I felt like a target, constantly under scrutiny. I heaved the trash bag onto the curb, the plastic crinkling loudly in the still air. I stretched my back, a familiar ache settling in. The sun was starting to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension that had been building in my shoulders. It wasn't worth dwelling on. It was just Karen. And I was just trying to live my life. As I turned to head back inside, I saw her. Karen, standing on her porch, arms crossed, a look of pure venom etched on her face. I braced myself. Here we go again, I thought. Another lecture, another veiled insult. I prepared my usual response, a polite nod, a brief apology, and a hasty retreat. But this time, it was different. This time, her eyes held a dangerous glint, a simmering fury that sent a shiver down my spine. This time, Karen wasn't just going to complain. You. Stop right there. Karen's voice sliced through the quiet afternoon like a shard of glass. The shrillness of it made me wince. I stopped, turning to face her, my heart starting to pound a little faster. What was it this time? Had I parked too crookedly? Did a rogue leaf dare to blow onto her pristine lawn? What is it, Karen? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. I didn't want to escalate things, but I refused to be intimidated. I was standing on the sidewalk in front of my own house. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I've had it with you, Tim, she spat, her face contorted with rage. I've had it with your trash, your car, your whole presence in this neighborhood. You're bringing down the property values. You don't belong here. Her words stung, each one a tiny barb digging into my soul. I had heard these kinds of things before, not explicitly perhaps, but the implication was always there. The subtle whispers, the sideways glances, the feeling of being an outsider. But to hear it spoken so openly, so brazenly, by a woman I barely knew, it still hurt. It still stung, even after all these years. "Karen, I don't know what your problem is," I said, my voice rising slightly, "but I've lived in this house for over 30 years. I pay my taxes. I mind my own business. I have as much right to be here as you do." "Right?" she scoffed, taking a step down from her porch. "You think you have a right? You're nothing but a—" She trailed off, searching for the most offensive word she could muster, her eyes filled with a hateful fire. I knew what she was going to say. I could see it in her eyes, the ugly slur that was bubbling to the surface. I clenched my fists, trying to control my anger. I was an old man, not used to conflict. My hands were gnarled and swollen from years of hard work, not from fighting. But I wasn't going to stand there and let her unleash her vitriol on me. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. "Don't," I warned, my voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare say it." But she did. The word, laced with venom, flew from her lips like a poisoned dart. It hit me square in the chest, stealing my breath and igniting a fire in my belly. Time seemed to slow down. The cicadas faded into the background. The sun seemed to dim. All I could see was Karen's hateful face, twisted with prejudice. And then, before I could react, she lunged. Not with a punch, not with a kick, but with a slap. Her hand connected with my cheek, a sharp, stinging blow that knocked my head to the side. My glasses flew off my face and landed on the sidewalk with a clatter. For a moment, I was stunned, disoriented. The pain was a burning sensation that radiated through my face. I staggered back, clutching my cheek, my vision blurring. The world swam around me. I couldn't believe it. She had actually hit me. This woman, this stranger, had actually laid her hands on me. The disrespect, the audacity, the sheer unprovoked violence of it all sent a wave of fury crashing over me. You hit me," I stammered, my voice shaking with disbelief and rage. Karen just stood there, her chest heaving, a triumphant smirk on her face. "That's right, I did," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "And I'm calling the police. I'm going to tell them you attacked me. You assaulted me. They'll believe me." Who are they going to believe, an old black man or a respectable white woman? She turned towards her house, pulling out her phone as she did. "I'm calling right now." That was it. That was the final straw. The slap was bad enough, but the threat, the blatant use of her privilege and my race against me, was unbearable. I had endured her harassment for months, trying to be the bigger person, but this was too much. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I knew I had to do something. I had to fight back. For myself, for my dignity, and for every other person who had ever been targeted because of the color of their skin. Just as Karen turned to go inside to call the police, a voice boomed from across the street, shattering the tense silence. I saw everything. The voice was loud, clear, and filled with righteous indignation. We both turned to see Mr. Henderson, the retired history teacher who lived 2 houses down from Karen, standing on his porch, his face red with anger. Mr. Henderson was a quiet, unassuming man, usually hidden behind his books and his garden. He wasn't one to get involved in neighborhood disputes. But he was a man of principle, a man who believed in justice and fair play. And he had just witnessed Karen's act of blatant racism and violence. "I saw her slap him," Mr. Henderson shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Karen. "I saw the whole thing. She's lying. He didn't touch her." Karen froze, her face paling. Her carefully constructed facade of victimhood began to crumble before my eyes. She had assumed that no one was watching, that she could get away with her lies and her prejudice. She hadn't counted on Mr. Henderson. She underestimated the power of a good neighbor. "Mr. Henderson, you don't understand," Karen stammered, her voice losing its earlier confidence. He was threatening me. I was just defending myself. That's a lie. Mr. Henderson retorted, his voice unwavering. He was standing on the sidewalk, minding his own business. You were the one who started yelling and screaming. You were the one who attacked him. More neighbors started to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. They stood on their porches, watching the scene unfold, their faces etched with curiosity and concern. Some of them knew Karen, some of them knew me, but all of them were now witnesses to her lies. I have it all on video, a woman's voice called out from the house next to mine. It was Maria, a young Filipina woman who worked from home as a graphic designer. Maria was always friendly, always smiling, but I never knew she would have my back like this. My security camera caught the whole thing. I'm sending it to the police right now. Karen's face contorted with panic. Her carefully laid plan was falling apart. She had been so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to manipulate the situation to her advantage. But now, she was exposed, her prejudice laid bare for everyone to see. The power of witnesses. That's what changed everything. That's what turned the tide. Karen was banking on her word against mine. She was counting on the ingrained biases and prejudices of the system to protect her. But she didn't factor in the courage of ordinary people who were willing to speak up, to stand up for what was right. Mr. Henderson. Maria. My neighbors. They were my unexpected allies, my shield against Karen's hatred. Their voices, their actions, gave me strength. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that there were still good people in the world, people who believed in justice and equality. As the realization of her predicament dawned on Karen, her composure completely shattered. She began to rant and rave, shouting obscenities and insults at everyone who dared to challenge her. Her true colors, the ugliness that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long, were now on full display. But her tirade was cut short by the sound of sirens. The police were on their way. And this time, they weren't coming for me. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers illuminated the street, casting long, distorted shadows. Two officers, a man and a woman, emerged from their vehicles and approached the scene, their faces grim and professional. The crowd of neighbors parted to let them through, their eyes fixed on Karen, who was still ranting and raving on her porch. "What's going on here?" the male officer asked, his voice calm but firm. "This man attacked me." Karen shrieked, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "He assaulted me. I want him arrested." The officer turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, is this true? Did you assault this woman?" I shook my head, my voice still shaking with emotion. "No, sir. It's not true. She attacked me. She slapped me in the face." I gestured to my still throbbing cheek. The officer turned to Mr. Henderson, who stepped forward. "Officer, I saw everything. This woman slapped him. He didn't touch her." The female officer then spoke, "We have video evidence of the incident as well." She was looking at Maria, who now had her phone in her hand. "The neighbor has already sent us the footage from her security camera." The male officer turned back to Karen, his expression hardening. "Ma'am, we have video evidence that contradicts your statement. We also have multiple witnesses who corroborate the victim's account. You are under arrest for assault and filing a false police report." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No. This is a mistake. You can't arrest me. I'm the victim here." But the officers weren't listening. They approached her, their movements swift and efficient. Karen struggled, resisting their attempts to handcuff her, but it was no use. She was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and, most importantly, caught in her own web of lies. As the officers led her away, her screeching voice echoing down the street, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. Justice was being served. The neighbors began to disperse, murmuring amongst themselves. Some offered me words of support, others simply nodded in sympathy. Maria came over and hugged me, her eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Tim," she said. "She's been nothing but trouble since she moved in." Mr. Henderson approached me, his hand outstretched. "Are you all right, Tim?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "That was a terrible thing she did." I shook his hand, my eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for standing up for me. I don't know what I would have done without you." "We're neighbors, Tim," he said, his voice firm. "We have to look out for each other. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "I couldn't let her get away with that kind of blatant racism. It's not right." The police officers took Karen to one of the police cars. As they drove away, I looked at the crowd of onlookers. My neighbors. For once I felt like I belonged. These people, my neighbors, risked their safety to help me get the justice I deserve. It was an emotional moment for me to see people that I barely know doing that for me. As the police lights faded into the distance, I looked forward to having a peaceful life again for once. The days that followed Karen's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The local news picked up the story, and it quickly went viral. The video from Maria's security camera was shared thousands of times, sparking outrage and condemnation. Karen became a symbol of racial prejudice and entitlement, her face plastered across social media accompanied by angry comments and scathing memes. I, on the other hand, became a symbol of resilience and dignity. People from all over the country reached out to offer their support and encouragement. I received letters, emails, and phone calls from strangers who were touched by my story and inspired by my strength. It was overwhelming, but also incredibly heartwarming. I had become a reluctant hero, a symbol of hope in a world that often felt divided and hateful. The police investigation moved quickly, which was so rare. Given the overwhelming evidence against her, Karen was charged with assault, filing a false police report, and a hate crime. Her lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man, tried to argue that she was mentally unstable, that she had been under stress, that her actions were out of character. But the video evidence and the witness testimony were too strong to overcome. The trial was brief and decisive. The jury found her guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern-faced woman with a reputation for being tough on crime, sentenced her to a lengthy prison term and mandated that she complete anger management and racial sensitivity training. But the judge wasn't done there. There was another unique part of her conviction. As part of her sentence, the judge also ordered Karen to sell her rental house and permanently banned her from living within a 50-mile radius of our neighborhood. The judge stated that this measure was necessary to protect the peace and safety of the community. The news of Karen's sentence and the residency ban was met with jubilation in our neighborhood. People cheered, celebrated, and toasted to a new beginning. We had finally rid ourselves of the poison that had been infecting our community for so long. With Karen gone, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed dramatically. The tension that had been palpable for months dissipated, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and unity. People started talking to each other more, organizing neighborhood events, and looking out for one another. We had been through a difficult experience together, and it had brought us closer. I felt a renewed sense of belonging, a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I started spending more time in my garden, tending to my roses, enjoying the quiet beauty of the afternoon sun. I reconnected with old friends, and even made some new ones. My children and grandchildren visited more often, drawn by the positive energy and the sense of community that had returned to our street. Life wasn't perfect, of course. The scars of Karen's prejudice would always remain. But I refused to let her define me, to let her steal my joy or my sense of hope. I had survived, I had prevailed, and I had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever.